do the work as we were elected to do, and to continue to bless and guide us, help our chairman to undertake his mission with his usual dexterity, and also enable our members to participate fruitfully. We want to also ask for blessings on the team that is represented by the Integrity Commission this afternoon. And we are asking, Father, that you will continue to bless and guide us. These are the mercies we ask. In your dear name's sake, amen.
Thank you very much, Member Paulwell. I'd like to use this opportunity to welcome all the members of the Oversight Committee of Parliament that are present, and to welcome also the members of the Commission who are here, led by the Executive Director, Mr. Craig Christie. We will have Mr. Christie introduce his team in short order, but I'd like also to very specially welcome the new member. In fact, we have two new members of the Commission, of the Oversight Committee, and by resolution in the House, we had some changes which I'd like to indicate. That the Honorable Carl Samuda and Mr. Mark Golding would be replaced by Mr. Honorable Everett Warmington and Mr. Julian Robinson. Mr. Robinson is here. Mr. Warmington is on his way, and I'd like to use the opportunity to formally welcome you, Mr. Robinson, to the committee, and to indicate our full confidence in the quality and level of contribution that we know you will make. Certainly, your stewardship in other areas have recommended you in a very strong and powerful way, and we're quite confident that you will add great value to the deliberations of this committee. Before I make my opening remarks, therefore, I'd ask that the Executive Director, Mr. Christie, would you introduce your team?
Thank you, Chairman Bartlett, honorable members of the committee. We're grateful to be here today at this, our second meeting with the Oversight Committee. And Chairman Bartlett, I want to start by congratulating you. The last time we were here, Chairman Samuda chaired the proceedings. So this is our first meeting with you. Before I start, I just want to convey the best wishes from the Commission's Chairman, Mr. Justice Seymour Panton, and our commissioners. They've sent their warm regards. And I just turn to introducing the members of the Office of the Integrity Commission who are here today. We have four statutory directors and 2 support directors. I will start with Mr. Craig Beresford, who is right behind me. He's our Director of Information and Complaints. Mr. Kevin Stevenson, who is our Director of Investigation. Ms. Keisha Prince in the blue, who is our Director of Corruption Prosecution. Mr. Ran Evans, who is our Director of Corruption Prevention, Stakeholder Engagement, and Anti-Corruption Strategy. Mr. Delano Gaskin, our Director of Information Technology, Delano. And Ms. Carly Knight, our Director of Corporate Services. We have other members of our senior management here, Chair. Mr. Maurice Barrett, he's a Manager, Anti-Corruption Policy, Strategic Engagement and Corruption Prevention. Gillian Pottinger, the Commission's Legal Counsel. Ms. Rosemary Leng, Commission's Chief Accountant. Fiona McLaren, Manager, License, Asset Divestment, Acquisition, Investigation Division, and Ms. Joy Powell, our Manager, of Complaints, Protected Disclosures in the Information and Complaints Division. I don't think I've left out anybody. Again, sir, I'd just like to say that, we have been, the Integrity Commission has been vested with responsibility on the law to ensure the highest standards of probity, integrity, and good governance in the Jamaica public sector. It stands to reason, therefore, that we too must be held to account.
I came in late. Who's Miss Carousel Carr, who I talk with all the time?
She isn't here.
Oh, she's the one who bothers me all the time. So.
Yes, Chair, I was saying that it stands to reason that we at the Integrity Commission must also be held to account, and we're happy to be here to have the Oversight Committee, in the discharge of its mandates on the Integrity Commission Act, review the work of the Integrity Commission and ask us questions, which we look forward to answering. If there are matters that we are unable to answer, because having regard to our governance structure, we report to a board of 5 commissioners. I will note your questions or concerns, and I will ensure that we get adequate responses for you.
Very much, Executive Director Christie.
Chairman, out of courtesy,
Sure.
I am not properly dressed for the meeting, and I seek your approval to remain in the chambers.
The guidance I seek from the clerk of the House.
Yes.
Thank you very much. We have been so directed by the clerk, and I'd like to welcome you as being appropriately attired for this committee meeting. So I want to reiterate the critical importance of this Oversight Committee, its role as one that provides the Parliament overall with an overview of the performance and activities of the Commission, the Integrity Commission, which is a creature of statute and responds to the Parliament of the land. And this committee, therefore, seeks to give the assurance to Parliament that the activities of the Commission are carried out in the best tradition and that the results are in keeping with the objectives that have been set, that the resources that are allocated are effectively and appropriately utilized and give us the best value for the taxpayers' money. Critical in all of this is perhaps to review whatever recommendations and or actions that they take, and to have the Parliament of the land approve by affirmative resolution those proposals that are put. We review their annual report, and we review whatever other report that the Commission may make with regards to investigation and activities that they do from time to time. The last meeting that we had, when we looked at how we would operate and function essentially in this new administration, we were of the view that there was need for some technical support for the committee, and also that the Commission would offer us such technical support to enable us to not just go through the reports. Yes. Member Warmington, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman.
I break my presentation to welcome the newest member of the committee, Mr. Everett Warmington. He wasn't here when we cited.
Clifford Warmington.
Mr. Clifford, yes.
Thank you.
Clifford Everett Warmington. He wasn't here when I cited the authority that would give him his presence in this committee. And so I repeat for his benefit that by virtue of an extract here from the minutes, that a resolution was made by the leader of the House to have the members Carl Samuda and Mark Golding be replaced by Reverend Clifford Everett Warmington and Julian Robinson. So it is in that context that we welcome you, and we know that you will give the quality contribution to this committee that has become synonymous with your stewardship over the years. And we are satisfied that you will add great value to our proceedings and deliberations. Welcome, Member Warmington.
Thank you, Chairman. But a notice on my first visit that we're breaking rules, breach of the Constitution is standing orders.
We sought permission. Indeed, we sought interpretation from the clerk with regards to whether the member was appropriately dressed for a committee meeting of the House, and she was very clear
that it is permitted?
Yes. So we are guided by the clerk. Thank you very much, member. Appreciate it. So we were at the point where we have an understanding that some technical support will be given to the committee from a now very robust commission, which has the capacity so to do. And so we're looking forward to seeing that one materializing, as we know that much of the report that you're going to be giving from now on will require that type of a more detailed look, and given how the nature of parliamentary arrangements are and the composition, it is always useful to have a technical eye giving prompts that will advise us as to how to investigate the reports that you have put forward. So we look forward to that. Then, of course, we have the issues of the reports that you've made prior to this administration, this new administration coming on. And I think that that report, we started to investigate. It was truncated somewhere in between. And so what we will do over the next sessions is to review all the reports that you've made. For this particular meeting, we would want to review in depth the latest report, as it is more current and speaks to some of the more appropriate recommendations that you're making. And so I would say that for today's report, you would focus on the latest report that you've given to us, that is the 2020-21 report. I think we've covered much of what I would like to say initially, and if there's any comment that any member wishes to make as a start, I certainly would accommodate. Member Robinson. See, I know you're not accustomed to this side. So.
I know. I was going to raise it really as a matter arising, and I wanted some clarity in terms of the scope of the committee. In addition to the annual reports, which I understand would be reviewed by the committee, is it that the investigative reports that are done by the Integrity Commission would be the sole purview of this committee of Parliament for review, action, and recommendation? I wanted clarity on that.
Subject to the guidance of the clerk, on whom I rely for much of these interpretations, the responsibility of this committee is to review all the reports that are made. So the annual report is the major report, but reports that are done in the interim, as they are submitted to Parliament, we review. We cannot review unless they are submitted to Parliament.
You have answered me. So the question is yes. So this committee is the only committee of Parliament that would review reports tabled by the Integrity Commission. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Member Robinson. So we are going to indicate that their apologies for the absence from Mrs. Marisa Dalrymple-Filbert, Speaker of the House, for this meeting. We have no other apologies. No. The minutes will be confirmed at a later point. Indeed, they were prepared. I'm advised that there was an insufficiency of those for distribution, and that's being corrected. And so at a later point in the proceedings, we will. Yes, Member.
Thank you, Chairman. If I may be of assistance to you and the committee in respect of the matter raised by Member Robinson about the scope of the committee's work, to direct attention to Standing Order 73D. That's the latest amendment reflecting what is contained in the Integrity Commission Act. It sets out the duty of the committee as that of monitoring and receiving the performance, monitoring and reviewing the performance of the functions of the Integrity Commission, reporting to both Houses of Parliament on any matter relating to the performance of the functions of the Integrity Commission, reviewing the annual report and any other report of the Commission, and submitting recommendations in relation thereto to both Houses of Parliament, assessing the effectiveness of the Integrity Commission and the appropriateness of its procedures, and D, convening and considering a report submitted to Parliament under Section 34 of the Integrity Commission Act within 30 days of the submission of the report. And the matter at Section 34 relates to matters that the Director of Corruption Prosecution would be dealing with. If the reference remains correct, yes.
Thank you very much, Member Malahuford, for that very detailed and more legal explanation. I think we tried to cover those in the general comments that we gave as a response to the member's question. The minutes, I think, are now before you and have been distributed. The minutes reflect the meetings that took place on July 21 of this year, which was our first meeting of the Integrity Commission Oversight Committee. And I take it that it is read and would ask for appropriate confirmation of the minutes.
The matter, Chairman, is that I'm only seeing them for the first time. They just brought to my attention.
But I think she did send it by soft copy. to everybody. So
No.
you really should have read. It's just that the hard copy is just now being distributed.
I would ask that you postpone the confirmation of the minutes to the next meeting.
Is that the wish of the committee? Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Chairman. In addition to which, only Marlene Malahoo Ford and members Delroy Chuck would be able to give any confirmation on these minutes, as they are the only two members of the committee outside of the chairman present at that particular meeting.
So, Chairman, I think we may have a procedural matter that we may have to look at, because these minutes relate to the sitting of a parliament that is not this one.
No, I think there's a...
Not the January 14th.
No, there is a set of minutes that happened during, I think, January 2021.
I believe they can only be treated for information and background information to the committee.
Yes, but there is
That
a
is
set
not the
of
one you're
minutes
dealing
here
with.
from January 14, 2021,
Very well.
which is also before us.
That is the one Member Chuck is asking for a deferment
Yes.
of consideration,
Indeed,
given the
if-
short circulation of it.
Chairman, just by way of my understanding is the minutes of the prior sitting is not being considered for confirmation at all as per the agenda. It was just circulated for additional information. On the agenda, minutes of meeting January 14, 2021 is the minutes for confirmation.
Yes.
Yes, Member Chuck is asking for additional time, but as indicated before, only two members of the committee would have been present at that particular
doesn't
sitting.
matter.
So we would be hoping that at the next sitting and consideration of these minutes, those two members are present.
In fairness, those two members are here. No, but to be honest, these minutes were all circulated by soft copy. I got mine, I read it. I got mine 2 days ago, and I read it. But to the point, if the committee is of the view that we should defer, it will be so done. So the next item,
Chairman,
of course, is...
Chairman, sorry. Even though you have deferred it, there's a matter, can I just raise on a matter that arose out of the minutes?
Yeah?
Huh? I've heard defer
No,
that
well,
to-
we have to, since we have decided to defer it, we will defer any discussion
all right.
on it for such time.
All right, I'll postpone that.
So item 6, new business, and for that, the new business relate now to the review of the annual reports of the Integrity Committee for 2019-2020 and 2020-21. And so I'll ask the Executive Director of the Commission to give his general overview, and then for the committee to examine the reports.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could lend some assistance to the Honourable Committee, a question was raised concerning the duties of the Oversight Commission, and a passage was read from the standing orders. The duties of the Oversight Commission are embodied in the 4th schedule to the Integrity Commission Act, and there's an error in one of the provisions. It outlines 5 functions, and they were read by Member Malahoo Ford. But the last one, which says convening and considering a report submitted to Parliament under Section 34 within 30 days of the submission of the report. Section 34 of the Act does not refer to reports. It's actually Section 36. So there was a drafting error here. And if I could go to Section 36 for you, it says a commission may at any time be required by either House of Parliament to investigate a matter relating to an act of corruption and table a report thereon. That's 1. Subsection 2, the Commission shall not later than 3 months after the end of each financial year or within such longer period as the Parliament may approve, submit to Parliament an annual report, and it goes on. And then 3, the Commission may at any time submit a report relating to any particular matter which in the opinion of the Commission requires the special attention of Parliament. The Commission exercised its powers under this provision just probably about 4 weeks ago by submitting a special report to Parliament. So these are the reports to which your standing order would apply, and it will be founded on Schedule 4. So it's actually Section 36 of the Integrity Commission Act.
Yes, the correction is noted.
Okay, Chair. And then a question was raised by you, Chair, with respect to assistance to be provided by the Commission in terms of providing a Parliament liaison officer. Fortuitously, when we were redesigning the organization structure of the organization of the Commission, we included provision for a Parliament and public sector liaison officer, which would fall under Director Rand, his division, and that's the Corruption Prevention, Stakeholder Engagement, and Anti-Corruption Division. Mr. Evans should be known to some of you. And we had interviews for that position quite recently, and we have made an offer to someone to start in February, I think it is. So, but until then, in the event that, the committee may want to review, let's say, investigation reports, we can make arrangements for that.
The clerk of the committee, Ms. Kamisha Bailey, who I think you all are very familiar with, she would be the immediate liaison person with you in relation to that. And so we, through her, would get to you whatever detail we may wish to have investigated and or providing better particulars on for the purposes of our investigation.
Okay, okay, Chair. And you asked me to give you an overview, or to give the committee an overview of the annual report. Before I start, I just want to say that the Integrity Commission Act is a very unique piece of legislation. It was structured by this Parliament. It accords to the statutory directors of the Commission, and there are 3 named statutory directors in the legislation. The Director of Information and Complaints, Craig Beresford, Director of Investigation, Mr. Kevin Stevenson, and the Director of Corruption Prosecution, Ms. Keisha Prince. It accords to those 3 persons appointed by the Governor General certain powers or authority, responsibility, and accountability under the Act. The Act also confers certain responsibilities on the Executive Director of the Integrity Commission. And all these directors, these officers, have been specified in the Act. In addition to that, the Commission, which is constituted by 5 appointed commissioners, has the authority, the residual power, to appoint other divisions or to create other divisions and appoint directors for those divisions. And the Commission, since its establishment, has exercised its authority once in that particular regard, and that was early this year when it appointed Director Rand Evans as or Director of Corruption Prevention, Stakeholder Engagement, and Anti-Corruption Strategy. So there are 4 statutory directors. I spoke about administrative support directors or technical support directors, and as IT director and corporate services director. Provision is not made in the Act for them. The 4 directors, statutory directors, have specified powers under the Act. And they are, however, subject to the special and general directions given by the Commission, save and except for the Director of Corruption Prosecution, who cannot be directed, even by the Commission, with respect to prosecutorial matters, pretty much like the provisions in the Constitution, which are similar for our Director of Public Prosecutions. So in terms of the governance structure, I'm just trying to give you an overview for the purposes of the conduct of these proceedings, in that questions that will fall to the divisional purview of any of the statutory directors are questions that I will ask them to answer. or issues to comment upon, because by law, those matters fall to their responsibility. The Executive Director, by virtue of Section 29 of the Integrity Commission Act, is responsible basically for administrative functions and providing support to the Commission, meetings and that sort of thing, and to do general coordination, and to take care of the day-to-day business of the affairs of the Commission, except matters which reside within the purview by law of the statutory directors. Okay?
The very robust attendance at this meeting.
Yes, yes, Chair. Yes. And not only that, we want to make sure that we are properly positioned to answer any questions that you or the honorable members of the committee may have for the Commission. We want to be accountable. We want to be accountable. Okay?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just checking the provision. Not sure if I heard correctly, so seeking clarification and correction. If I didn't hear correctly, whether the understanding from the Executive Director is that the Director of Prosecutions is subject to, cannot be directed by anyone, whether it's the understanding that that includes the Director of Public Prosecutions. I'm not sure if I heard it correctly, because it was a little muffled.
The Director of Public Prosecution.
The DPP has some residual powers. I will ask the Director, Keisha, to answer that question directly, please. Thanks.
Because in light of the provision at Section 94 of the Constitution, all persons who exercise prosecutorial powers would fall under, well, there are certain things that the DPP can do in respect of that constitutional power. Just seeking a clarity in respect of the understanding of the Commission with that.
Thank you, Member Ford. The overarching responsibility, as you are aware, with respect to prosecution lies constitutionally within the Director of Public Prosecutions. So there is always her discretion to exercise that power in all circumstances. However, specifically in relation to the Integrity Commission Act, the provision that guides the interaction lies in subsection 4, 34(4), that speaks to advice being sought, whether by the DCP on her own volition or on the direction of the Commission, for the guidance of the Director of Public Prosecutions, and where there is a disparity, that her opinion prevails. I hope that
right. I think that answers it.
Thank
and that
you
is,
so
in fact, the provision that I was seeking to highlight. So thank you.
No problem.
Yes.
Can I, Chairman?
Go ahead.
Sir Christie, head of the Commission, I listened to you giving us a brief overview of the structure. I was just wondering, who audits the Integrity Commission?
Thank you for your question, Member. The Commission is somewhat of a hybrid body. As you know, it's an amalgamation of three commissions that previously existed. Currently, we have external auditors who audit the accounts of the Commission on an accrual accounting basis. And to the rear of the report, you will see that. A carryover from the legacy institutions, Office of the Contractor General, was appropriation accounts, that method of accounting. And we were audited, those institutions, that institution was audited by the Auditor General. Okay? And the form of accounting is what we call appropriation accounts. So I say we're hybrid because we're still required to do both types of accounts. And we have just gone through a number of interactions with the Financial Secretary and the Auditor General in that particular regard. So what you have here in the annual report is the audited accounts, accrual accounts by an external auditor, and the appropriation accounts have been done, but you have to go through what you call a verification and a certification process. The verification process is typically done by an internal auditor. The Commission is restructuring, and we have made provision for an internal audit unit composed of 3 persons, including a Chief Audit Officer. That person, when hired, that person actually starts in another 2 weeks, would do the verification as well as the certification. But we do not have an internal auditor. So with the permission of the Permanent Secretary in the Office of the Prime Minister, and the Office of the Prime Minister is our parent ministry for administrative purposes, because remember, we're an independent commission of parliament, so we don't really report into the executive, but it's there for administrative purposes, was kind enough to facilitate the services of the OPM's internal auditor to do the verification. We have already been instructed that the certification of those accounts must be done by an external auditor. So we're actually engaged in a procurement process to get that done, because our external auditor, the contract that we have, cannot be amended to cover that type of accounting.
Chairman,
I hope I've answered your question.
Well, if you have a follow-up question, because I was a little bit confused when I went through the report and saw the Auditor General as a commissioner, and I was a bit confused as to whether or not the Constitution required an audit.
I'm happy that you raised the question, member, because typically, as I said, like when I was Contractor General, our accounts were always audited by the Auditor General, or the Office of the Auditor General. And in this particular instance, those appropriation accounts would be audited by the Auditor General. But for the very matter that you raised, and the Auditor General has been very firm on this, that it would raise a conflict of interest for her to be a commissioner of an entity in respect of which she'll be conducting an audit. So we have had the correspondence, and we have decided that we have to go external to get an external auditor to do that. And we're currently procuring the services of an external auditor to get that done. So to put that matter to rest, although the Auditor General is by law a designated commissioner of the Integrity Commission, she has been very firm in her position that she cannot exercise her constitutional authority, which should have otherwise exercised in this particular instance.
Thank you.
I would love for us to, follow the order as I try to present, so as to enable every member who wants to make a contribution gets that opportunity. So if there is clarification on the point raised by Member Holness, by all means, AG.
Thank you so much. Yes. Chairman, I am at your discretion. I'm at your discretion. I think the issue that has been raised, as acknowledged by the Executive Director, is one that the committee will have to spend a little time to look at to see how we address it, because of I think there are issues that may have to be resolved legislatively and not just by way of practice, having regard to the constitutional remit of the Auditor General under Section 122, the provisions of the Constitution dealing with it, and the naming of the Auditor General as a commissioner. So perhaps it is fortuitous that it has been raised, because it's a matter that I believe will have to be addressed legislatively. I
think that having said that, AG, from your own pedestal, I am, as chairman, inclined to take this forward and I will take note of the concern as expressed by the committee, and will move it forward to examine through the Minister of Justice and the team what legislative remedy there could be for this. But I'm sorry. The order is you yield to him. Yeah, but you have to be careful that in yielding to him, you're not, because we do have a time frame to work with here, and we can't be here all night, you know. And in fairness, the executive director has not even begun, in seriousness, his review of the report. AGs, right. But if, indeed, then Member Warmington would precede you in this. So we can proceed.
Chairman, I intended to raise that issue later on. I don't know, I don't understand. The executive director is now saying that they have external auditors who audit the department. As far as I'm concerned, any department or agency that receives public funds falls under the Auditor General's department. So he has no such authority, neither the Attorney General, the Auditor General. As the AG said, I'd planned to raise it, that there was a defect in the legislation because Section 120, subsection 3 makes it clear that anyone holding that office cannot be appointed to any other body. And that should be seen before. So what you ought to have done was to have left the committee having realized that there's a defect in law or in the bill as it was written. Because she can't sit as a commissioner because the Constitution is breached right there. I asked a question, may I bring it up again? I've asked a question more than once when I sat on this committee before. Every person who receives an income from taxpayers' money, we are at a certain salary, we are required to submit an annual return or report to the Integrity Commission. Now, I've asked a question before, to whom the members of the Integrity Commission submit their report? And the commissioners, to whom do they submit this report? They are earning from the coffers of the government, from the taxpayers, and if every individual is required to do that, the question I've asked, this is my third time asking in this committee, and I've got no response. To whom the members of the Integrity Commission, the executive director right now, to whom do they file the annual return? And to whom the commissioners file their return? I've gotten no answers. That is the third time I'm asking this question.
If I may, again, Chairman, just to say that what I understood from Mr. Christie's response is that a practical solution had to be found to deal with the issue because naturally questions of conflict of interest would arise with the Auditor General as a commissioner auditing. So I think the committee should show its understanding of that practical solution which was sought in the interim to address the matter. But because we are tasked with the responsibility of reviewing the effectiveness of the procedure and having regard to the constitutional provision and the provision in the Act itself and the conflict, we will then have to report back to the House that this is a matter that needs to be addressed. And my considered view is that it would have to be addressed legislatively. But I think it is fair to say that in the interim, a solution had to be found because the statements had to be audited. And I do believe that as an interim solution, it probably was a better one to ensure that the statement was audited. But I do believe that the issue can only be remedied legislatively.
And I think if indeed we are seized with that position as put forward by the member, which indeed I had already indicated earlier, then we can move on to deal with another area of concern that any member may have. Yeah. Just to make the point that we are fully seized with the anomaly that that situation presents, and the legislative remedy is to be sought, and this committee will move it forward appropriately.
Chairman, perhaps for completeness, I think the question that would arise for consideration of the full House is whether the the Auditor General ought properly be a commissioner of the Integrity Commission, having regard to the functions of the Auditor General and the vis-a-vis the Commission and the constitutional provisions around the role of Auditor General. I believe that is the question to be reported back to the House as we consider the issue raised.
And indeed, you are in a great position to guide that process when the appropriate moment comes.
Chairman, the question I had was a follow-up to Member Malahoo Fort's original point in relation to the Director of Corruption Prevention. And so my question is, if a matter is referred from the Integrity Commission's report for prosecution to the Director of Corruption, DCP, and that person, who is Ms. Prince, makes a decision to proceed with a prosecution, and the DPP disagrees with that decision, is it that the DPP's position is the position which would supersede the DCP's?
That is so.
Seek guidance again from the eminent authority that sits with us.
So, Chairman, what we are grappling with is an issue that should have been resolved at the higher level. When the reform direction came in respect of appointments of other prosecutors, and in particular a corruption prosecutor general, from my review of the deliberations and the documentations, that discussion was devoid of an analysis in relation to Section 94 of the Constitution. And a compromise was struck along the way, recognizing that the Office of DPP deals with so many of the regular matters, and matters in relation to corruption offenses may fall down in the queue. And so the policy decision was taken to provide for a Director of Corruption Prosecution, but that the performance of the functions would have to have regard to the provisions in Section 94 of the Constitution. And in the same way that the DPP is not subject to direction from anyone else, the Director of Corruption Prosecution would not be subject to direction from anyone else, but would have to be subordinate ultimately to the office of the DPP because of the provisions at Section 94 of the Constitution. And I think from what I hear from Ms. Prince, it is her understanding of the remit of her role. Right, but it doesn't entirely remedy the situation, because I think sooner than later we will have to grapple with a wider context of what we're seeking to do vis-a-vis what we have in the highest law of the Constitution. But these are matters that fall under the portfolio of the Honourable Member, who is the Minister of Justice with responsibility for constitutional reform.
Well, having gotten the clarity, it is a disappointment to me. I had hope with the establishment of the corruption prosecutor that individual or office holder would be able to proceed as such. But let's see how it works in practicality. But the whole purpose of going this route was to alleviate some of the pressures that the DPP had, and that we could speed up or have a particular focus on corruption prosecutions.
I can understand where Member Robinson is coming from, but it's not necessarily a bad thing, because we do have to align our laws within the constitutional construct. I mean, I know he's fully aware of that. But I understand the model we have is the model we have unless it is changed constitutionally. And the model is not unique to Jamaica. So do recall that when the Independence Constitution was settled, the decision was taken to separate the functions and to create the office of an independent director of public prosecution to deal with that, and everything else flows down from that, even while efforts are made in recognition of the paucity of resources, the burden there to enable the prosecutorial functions to be discharged otherwise, but they still would have to be subject to, in order for the other laws to be constitutional.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand down.
Of course, you had put me at the end. Mr. Christie, could you indicate to us the present allocation, your staff complement, and what it will be after you get everything you want? Because even in your opening statement, you indicated the possibility of additional directors, which means that my recollection is that some time ago you had projected quite a significant number of staff, additional staff, and even in the report itself, you have so many vacancies still to be filled. And so could you indicate at the end of the day, what would be your full staff complement? Secondly, I must admit, the little time I spent in government demonstrate to me that the more bureaucracy you have, the less work gets done. Things move from one desk to the next desk, and it looked like the bureaucracy create more work once it gets larger. So the question is, how do you justify increasing this bureaucracy? And my anecdotal look at bureaucracies in government is that it creates works for themselves. And then when it creates work for themselves, it asks for more staff, and you keep a sort of cycle of bureaucracy and increase of staff. Let me hope this is not what you plan, because at the moment you're getting about 800 million. By the time your full allocation of staff, it could be well over $1 billion, in terms of the budget support. So, we need to find out from this Oversight Committee the basis on which you're asking for these additional staff, for better functioning.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, through you, sir, may I respond?
But just to help you by saying that much of what the members asked has gone through a process already, which this Parliament participated very fulsome in, and the Ministry of Finance. So unless he really wants to find out from you if you are adequately staffed at the moment, and therefore what is missing and what should be added.
Chairman,
it's
I want to know what is the present complement.
Yeah, I heard that.
And what will it be at the end?
No, but it's only because you mentioned so much about what the bureaucracy does and, and how bigger you get.
Well,
but I'm only saying that those numbers are determined already.
No. But in his opening remarks, he asked that additional directors need to be appointed, which I don't think were in the...
Can I respond, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah,
Member Chuck, perhaps there's a misunderstanding. I pointed out, with respect to the directors, I pointed out that the legislation speaks to 3 specified statutory directors, but it reserves to the Commission the authority to appoint additional directors. And I've said they exercise that discretion once by appointing Mr. Evans. And that division that he's heading up, it's important that I give some background. There are 16 mandates assigned to the Interior Commission by this Parliament under Section 6 of the Act. When the Executive came into office last year, we did a gap analysis assessment of the organization, and we found that there was a big gap in terms of what it is that the Commission was established to do and the resources that we had. Of those 16 mandates, and I'll be very brief, only 5 were covered by the 3 statutory directors. So what we did was that we came up with a 4th division called the Corruption Prevention, Stakeholder Engagement, and an Anti-Corruption Division to handle strategy, to handle the other 11 functions. That's what we did. It's under that division, for example, we have the Parliament Liaison Officer. Okay? And let me explain something so that, you know, you raise a good point, Member Chuck, and I really want to make sure we clear the air and clarify. If you look at a number of anti-corruption legislative frameworks throughout the world, right here in the Caribbean, you will see provision for anti-corruption, corruption prevention powers being accorded to anti-corruption institutions, right? But when you construct the institution, we're not seeing provisions for the administration of the corruption prevention functions. When I served in a similar capacity in the Turks and Caicos Islands, for example, I had the same discussion in their parliament. The law provides for corruption prevention functions, but the institution was not designed to discharge it. So they go about fighting corruption, just like us here, by waiting for it to happen, and then you go chasing after it. You investigate and prosecute. What we're saying is that we would like to see a Jamaica where there's no corruption. You start by preventing corruption. And so it is very critical to have that function. Now, going back to the numbers, when the executive, and this is the substantive members of the executive were appointed last year, Parliament had already approved an organization structure of 132 persons. We did the gap analysis, and we came up with that 4th division, and we really didn't add more staff. We took staff positions and sort of put it under that umbrella. And then we strengthened the other divisions, and a lot of that strengthening came out of recommendations and deliberations in that committee hearing that we had in July in 2020, where, if you recall, Member Chuck, you were here when Director Kevin, or Director of Investigation, spoke about the tons of investigations that he had and his inability in terms of staff to get those investigations through. This very committee, not currently constituted, recommended that he must strengthen his division. So we strengthened all the other divisions, and we ended up with a staff count of 172. And by law, we can't just get up and appoint somebody. The law is very clear. Section 35 says that we must go first. Well, we go first to the Ministry of Finance, and it goes through a very rigorous process. We have to present them with job descriptions. And once they approve that, it doesn't end there. For other public sector agencies, it would end there. They could then get their budget and do what they're doing. But the governance arrangements for the Integrity Commission requires that we must come to a special committee of Parliament. It's provided for in Section 35, and 7 members. It's chaired by the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and on that committee sits the leader of government business in the House and in the Senate, and the leader of opposition business in the House and in the Senate, the President of the Senate, and I mentioned the Speaker, and the Minister of Finance. So it goes through a very rigorous process. And we went through all of that. That happened in November, between November and January, November last year and January. And so that's what we're aiming at, 172. The only other addition, though, and I must be very forthright with you, Member Chuck, is an additional 4 members of staff, which are currently in the pipeline, which we, in our interactions, you and I, decided that we would do. You remember my most recent, and do you know what I'm talking about? The whistleblower legislation. The Protective Disclosures Act, otherwise called the PDA. We are chair and members of the committee. There is a so-called Protective Disclosure Act, which is over a decade old. It has never been fully brought into effect, and we have seized the opportunity to take on that responsibility. And so Director Craig here, his division, which is the Information and Complaints Division, We have revamped it, and he has established a unit that will deal with that. And although we have not yet gotten the staff, he is miles ahead in terms of developing processes and procedures. And in fact, I will ask him I'll break at this point and ask him to comment on where you are and where you're headed. But it is to make sure that we can administer finally to bring the whistleblower legislation into effect in Jamaica. Okay, if you could answer.
Before you go, may I just say, Chairman, that the discussion is really not only to put it into effect, but also to start looking at how whatever improvements are. So I should have mentioned to you earlier, we have had discussion about setting up a joint select committee to look at the Whistleblower Act, which should have been done over 5 or 6 years ago. So to the extent that we need, I did indicate to him that there are so many joint select committee, at least wait until I close the NIDS, which was closed yesterday, close several of the committees, so we can now look at that joint select committee to look within a matter of weeks at the Whistleblower Act, okay?
You're going to deal with the Official Secrets Act as well, Member Chuck? Because that is often the one that is used as the one to silence people whenever they want to speak.
So I think
Yes, Chair,
you can. I just want to guide this process, because I think we could go on and on and on in this area. I think the question related to your organizational structure, the capacity you now have, if there are gaps. And I think that you have indicated where there could be gaps, but they are within the frame of the approved structure by the Parliament and the Ministry of Finance.
Yes, sir.
So we can move on.
Except for the other 4, right. And to answer the other piece of your question, Member Chuck, we currently have 98 members of staff on board, and the approved structure is 172. I had mentioned in the annual report that the bottleneck for us is the physical facilities to house them, and I'm happy to say that we're expecting to move into a new location in December, at which time we'll be able to, we're already recruiting. We'll abandon Barbados Avenue, we'll retain our office at the PIOJ building, and we'll move into another building. Yes.
Right. So, Edie, you can now proceed to discuss the other areas of your report, which will be investigated by the committee. Thank you.
And Chair, before I go on, Member Warmington raised a number of questions, and I think it's important that I answer them. I just want to say that our commission, we have a chairman who is a retired president of the Court of Appeal, Mr. Justice Seymour Panton, and we have another member who is a retired justice of the Supreme Court. And I can say that our commission is very scrupulous in its attention to ensuring that we operate within the rule of law. And some matters were raised, and I think it's very important that I speak to them. The question of the audit of accounts raised by Member Warmington. We try to live by the rule of law. Section 20, subsection 1 of this very act, which was promulgated in this Parliament, reads thus: the Commission shall keep proper accounts of its receipts, payments, assets, and liabilities, and such accounts shall be audited annually by an auditor, not the Auditor General, by an auditor appointed in each year by the Commission with the approval of the Minister, and a statement of accounts so audited shall form part of the annual report submitted pursuant to Section 36. There's no provision in this law for the Auditor General to audit the accounts of the Interior Commission. So,
Chairman, let me say here. Well, just a minute. No. There's no.
I think that, if we walk this route, we could continue just repeating and following through ad infinitum, and we never get to conclude this discussion today. I think much of the questions put by members are rhetorical in the context of dealing with the legislative defect that has been identified. We have agreed that that defect is there and that we're going to take it forward. So I would think that we should close that area of the discussion pending the outcomes of those deliberations through this committee and eventually the Parliament of the land. So they're from, I think, Member Christie.
Yes, Chair. I just wanted to
proceed.
put it on the record. And it's also...
I'm only saying that there probably is no need for it because there's not really calling to question for an immediate response from you today.
I understand, Chair. But a lot of these questions that are raised can be answered by the law. And that's the only point I'm trying to make. Yes. Yes. The other issue he raised was the filing of statutory declarations. And I'd like to respond, if you'd allow me, Chair, to say again that Section 64(1)(c) of the Integrity Commission Act makes specific provision for the filing of statutory regulations by the staff and officers of the Integrity Commission. With respect to the filing of declarations by the commissioners, the Commission went as far as to obtain a legal opinion from the Solicitor General of Jamaica as to how that matter should be treated. And I can say here for the records that that matter is being addressed in accordance with that legal opinion, which we can make available to the committee if it so desires. I can move on if you want. Okay, thanks. Now, with respect to the report, you wanted me to give you an overview of the report, sir. Again, we're guided by law. The Section 36 requires us to file an annual report within 3 months of the end of the financial year. So that's April, May, June, by the end of June. And we did that in this case. And the second schedule to the Act outlines what must be in the report. In other words, we don't have a choice in terms of what we put in the report. For example, the Office of the Contractor General, they could put in whatever they want to put in. Here, we are guided by law. And if you go to page 10 of the current report, 2020-2021, there are 10 matters, and you'll see it in italics, and we're required to respond to each of these. So in the preamble section of the report, before we get to the substance, you will have the chairman's remarks, you will have the executive director remarks, and then you get to, we have 5 committees of the board, and we give you the membership of the committees. That's on page 8 and on page 9, and the amount of meetings they have had during the financial year, and who are the persons who constitute those committees. And then, as I said, on page 10, we outline the various categories or headings under which we will report, or required to report to you. And the rest of the report basically follows that guideline. So the first section is a general description of matters referred to the Commission.
Sorry, Edie. So as to enable this process to move forward, in the review, we take it that members have read the report because they've come to you. What we would wish is for you to pick out the critical areas of concern and consideration that you would like us to relate to. And then we will respond and perhaps tell you now what are the critical areas that we might find that needs your guidance and clarity.
Okay, Chair.
Chair, could I just ask, since we're on page 11, could you indicate, ED, what is the criteria used to determine whether a matter proceeds to investigation?
If you want us to take that question now, Chair, I will ask...
Allow you to take it simply because it is part of the report overall, and the member is asking for guidance in terms of how we function, and I think that's a critical part of your remit.
Absolutely. So, I will ask our Director of Investigation, Mr. Kevin Stevenson, to address that question, Chair. The question is, what determines what matters proceed to investigation? I think it has to be answered both by, probably start with Director of Information and Complaints, because the law says if you have an allegation of corruption or a complaint, it must be directed first to the Director of Information and Complaints. So perhaps I could ask Director Craig to respond first, and then Director Kevin.
Thank you, Edie, and good afternoon, Chair, and honorable members. As it concerns the issue of allegations, it will have to fit in Section 32(1)(c) of the Integrity Commission Act, which means that we would have to find that the allegation involves or may involve an act of corruption, one. Second, any allegation regarding impropriety or irregularity with respect to the award, implementation, and termination of a government contract, or the grant, issue, suspension, or revocation of a prescribed license, or any other allegation with respect to non-compliance. So we assess it against these particular provisions, and we will make a determination whether or not it falls within our jurisdiction. Now, in the event that it does not fall within our jurisdiction, we would advise the complainant. Now, there are some instances that we would refer it to the more appropriate body, but they would have to be one of the competent authorities as set out in, I think it's Section 7 of the legislation.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Director Beresford has gone through some of the jurisdictional points in terms of the subject matter that we investigate. But I just want to point us then to Section 47 of the Act that looks at the matter having come to Director Craig. A complaint can be made to any member of the Commission, but the complaints are directed through the Directorate of Information and Complaints. And of course, having done his assessment as to whether they fall within the remit of the Commission, those that fall within the remit of the Commission would then be forwarded to my office for an assessment. The assessment is done under Section 47 of the Act, and I am required to consider the seriousness of the conduct that is being alleged. I'm required to look at whether the matter is one that is frivolous or vexatious, and whether another entity, so as to avoid duplication, is investigating the matter. So that's the assessment that is done. Typically, we do an opinion on the complaint, and then we make a decision. Well, I make a decision as to whether it is a matter that is serious enough for us to investigate. So that's one route. The other route is that there may be matters that arise in the public domain, and the Director of Investigation also has the authority to initiate investigations on his own initiative, of course subject always to the direction and control of the Commission. Also, other entities may make complaints to the Commission, but all of these complaints must go through the assessment under Section 47 of the Integrity Commission Act. I hope that satisfies.
Let me just, as a follow-up, in making your assessment and making a determination about whether you go forward or not, if, for example, members of the Commission, the 5 commissioners, have a different view than yours, whose view would prevail in a scenario like that?
Well, as indicated earlier, I am subject to the general and specific direction of the Commission, and there is a committee of the Commission that treats with matters having to do with investigation. Of course, to answer your question in short, it is the Commission's view that would prevail. However, as you can see here under 47, it just speaks to an assessment that is done. It doesn't require for it to be escalated. But if the Commission intervenes, of course, I would be subject to their general and specific directions.
Thank you, Director Craig and Director Kevin. Chair, so the rest of the headings, you asked us, or you asked me if there's anything that we would like to highlight. If you go to page 10, the fourth matter, or the fourth heading, is the one that the Commission would be most interested in, speaking about, and that says any recommendations for changes in the laws of Jamaica or for administrative action that the Commission considers should be made as a result of the exercise of its functions. The rest of the headings basically speak to the activities that we have undertaken throughout the year, right? So if that is your desire, Chair, we could move to that, and that's page 17. 17. And the recommendations run through to page 23. So I don't know how you want us to proceed, Chair, but we could quickly run through them and hear your views, or you ask us any questions or clarification if you so choose.
Okay, could I start at number 1? I read it, which is the issue of gifts to parliamentarians from relatives. I was trying to think what was the mischief you're trying to solve with relatives, because it could be relative, it could be boyfriend, it could be girlfriend, it could be neighbor, it could be friend. And really the issue here relates to gifts that are probably not reported and gifts that give rise to something that could be a corruptible offense. So I just wondered why the focus just on relatives vis-a-vis anybody else who I could use as a conduit to receive those illicit gifts, so to speak.
Thank you, Member Robinson. I'm going to ask our Director of Information and Complaints to speak, but before I do, I would just say that provisions for gifts is a common provision that you'll find in anti-corruption legislation. But I think you raise a good point, because typically when you see a provision having to do with gifts, it's of broad application. Your question is focused upon why relatives. So, Director.
Thank you very much, Edie, and thank you very much, Member. I'd wish to direct your attention to 43 of the legislation, which is broader. It states that subject to subsection 4, which is the one speaking to relative, any parliamentarian or public official who receives a gift which exceeds in value the amount of $100,000 or such other amount prescribed by the minister by order shall declare that gift. So that captures it in a broad sense. The only restriction here is that if you get that gift from a relative, then you don't necessarily need to report it, and that is the one that we are zooming in on, that we would want to be excised.
Okay, so just to be clear, if my wife decides to give me a watch, which might cost more than that, I'm obliged to report under the amendment you're seeking.
Correct. And I know that is one example, but there are other examples that it could be larger, and it could be persons who are relatives but more far removed. And we believe that there could be an instance where possibly some illicit payment is made to a relative and it's given as a gift to someone else, and you don't necessarily have to report it. Now, you could argue that you may have to still report it under your declaration asset if it's a cash gift. But the nuance is there, and it's something that I believe that the Commission, myself, the Commission, believe that it is a corruption-enabling device in this case. Thank you.
Yeah,
Member Paul,
will you continue with the level at 100,000, or would you contemplate in these high inflationary period increasing that? There's a question.
Well, Member Paul, that is a matter that would have to be discussed at the Commission level, but I think it's a reasonable question, and it's one that could be put before them.
Chairman, just following up on Member Paulwell, I would like to suggest that the Minister does consider prescribing another amount, having regard to the CPI and what that value was intended to convey at the time when the law was passed and what has happened since then. Right, no, that doesn't, the Commission can discuss it and give its recommendation, but under the law, the Minister also has the power to prescribe the amount. So not without any prejudice to the Commission, doing its consideration, I'm recommending that the Minister exercises the power and prescribe by order an amount that we can agree on that will not thwart, the goals of what we are trying to achieve. But to my mind, in the same way that we grapple with the value of fines, monetary penalties, when time passes and the value and what it's meant to convey changes so rapidly in this environment, I share the concern raised by Member Paulwell that consideration should be given in respect of the amount, the monetary amount.
So I think that that's a matter that I know where you have to go in that regard. And further, that the consideration of a ministerial determination as to a cap on the numbers is to be included. Yeah.
Let me just clarify, on a proper reading of the section, that amount is a matter that is determinable by the minister. So the law sets the amount at the time, and the law gives the power to change that amount. And the particular method of changing it came as part of our revised way of updating sums. So that method of prescription by order is a method that you would see in many other pieces of legislation. Which would enable a greater speed in updating pecuniary amounts set out in the law.
I want some further clarity on that for the guidance of E.D. Christie and his team. Would that mean that the Commission itself doesn't have the authority to prescribe the amount, but could make suggestions that the minister would then determine whether that amount is acceptable?
Yes, Chair, and this is what these recommendations, we can make recommendations. As Member Malahoo Ford rightly said, changing the law is something an authority which resides in Parliament. But the Act gives us, the discretion to make recommendations. So we will, every year when we do an annual report under the section, we will make recommendations. So.
Yes, Chairman, just...
Procedure to be followed. I think that's where I want to go now.
Mr. Christie is of counsel, so I believe he would approach these matters with that in mind. So yes, the general scheme of the law is that the recommendations would be made for consideration. You would be aware, Chairman, that my own advice to the government since assuming the role of Attorney General is to ensure that matters coming before the House for affirmative resolution, that those matters are properly considered, because I've had to deal with a host of regulations and orders that just went through almost in a rubber stamping way, which, did not receive the kind of oversight and scrutiny that the affirmative resolution methodology is supposed to provide for it. But I think the general scheme of the law is to enable the receipt of recommendations, and that necessarily is not to the exclusion of the exercise of powers within the Parliament that is to be exercised.
Can I go to item 3?
ED to go through, since he wants, these are specific recommendations for which he needs our responses on item by item. Am I correct?
Yes,
indeed.
Yes,
so
Chair.
Item 2 would be the next, and then.
Thank you, Chair. On the
Before we go on, sorry.
Provided, of course, members are comfortable with,
So,
in which case we say that and we move on. Yeah.
Just before we move to the second recommendation, I do believe that at some point we would have to deliberate on these recommendations to see.
Yes, but recall that it will then go back to the Commission for further consideration and then come back to us. But the guidance that is being given is that in the case of one, the Minister is the competent authority where you know, these penalties are concerned.
Save and accept that the recommendation is not in respect of the limit of the gift, but in relation to a non-requirement for the reporting of the gifts by relatives, because the Commission sees it as a loophole and a conduit to transmit things. So that is a matter that the committee will have to consider, bearing in mind, for example, what was raised by Member Robinson, that if he were to receive a watch from his wife, whether that means no, he should have to go ahead and report it. So that is a matter that will have to be considered by the committee, bearing in mind what is recommended. That is a separate issue from the limit of the gift.
Right. And I'm understanding you to say that today's deliberations will not fully consider those recommendations, but rather to take the recommendation for further deliberation and consideration. Very well.
Yes, Chair. Yes, item number 2. Basically, what we're seeking here is there was a regime which existed under the Contractor General Act, which made it a criminal offense for a person to obstruct or hinder the Commission in its discharge of its functions, or where a person willfully failed to comply with a lawful request of the Commission or made a false statement. In the mix of things, with the repeal of the provisions of the OCG Act and the creation of the new Integrity Commission Act, that scheme of provisions, that regime of offences have been excluded, despite the fact that you have preserved the powers that the Contractor General had. Those now reside within the functions and powers of the Director of Investigation. So this is merely asking the Parliament, through your committee, to make provision in the Integrity Commission Act to capture those 3 offences.
Chairman, I support that. Fully.
Thank you. Director Kevin, anything to add there?
Is there no provision at all in the Act which would further the goals to be achieved in respect of this? I'm just kind of scanning.
There is a provision in the Act at section 48(3) that speaks to persons who are required to provide information in respect of, when the Director of Investigation is exercising his power as a commissioner, akin to a commissioner of a commission of inquiry. But that is a very extreme provision that does not govern the day-to-day practices of requesting information, and I think it probably would be a little bit excessive to engage section 48 every time that you request information from an entity and they fail to provide it. Then you would have to summon them to come to the commission with the information, have a hearing, and if they fail, then of course you could charge under section 11 of the Commission of Inquiry Act. So that provision is at section 48(3). But outside of that, the section 51 provision is a very important provision in terms of providing the Commission with the information necessary to conduct its monitoring and investigation functions. If public bodies fail to supply the information to the Commission in terms of when contracts are awarded, then of course the Commission cannot monitor these public contracts, and so we would fall into problems. Under the Contractor General Act, it was an offense. Presently we have a compliance rate of about 97%, but if people believe that if they do not submit the information to the Commission and nothing will happen, then perhaps we could have a fallout from that high level of compliance.
I like to feel that when there is a high level of compliance, then the encouragement to take it to the zenith is pretty much there. And maybe it's not the big stick that does it, but I understand what you're trying to do.
I just ask the record to note, in light of Member Robinson's concurrence with the recommendation, that I'd certainly like an opportunity to check the policy intent of the provision of the law. It is a little different, and provisions like these are usually grounded in a specific policy consideration and remit. So just to note against the recommendation, the consideration of the committee is just to check to see what had informed this provision in dealing with the carrying over. Yes, yes. It jumps out at me in a way that caused me to believe that there is a specific reason why it was done like that. I'm just checking the Commission of Inquiries Act to see whether what is being proposed there is, in terms of offense, is covered, though I hear the Commission to be saying the route is too long, essentially, to get to that. That if
perhaps
the route of summoning the witnesses to get them to eventually. So
yes.
Immediately you want to move to an offense if there's non-compliance with the request.
Indeed.
And the failure to comply.
Indeed. And of course, the number of public bodies in Jamaica is almost 200. It would be very difficult to administer the functions in this way.
What will be taken of the committee's wish to look beyond the provision to see the intent based on policy. Yes.
So can I move to the next one then? Okay. Number 3, authority comment on investigation. I think the committee is pretty familiar with this one. There's been a lot of debate about it, public debate, and in fact, I have actually read in the media the views of members of the committee as previously constituted with respect to their views on this particular thing. It's called a gag clause, and this is a provision which prohibits the Commission, 53.3, from speaking on an investigation which is ongoing or making an announcement concerning an investigation. Two things: making an announcement about an investigation and commenting on an investigation while it's in course. As Contractor General, there's no secret that I used to make announcements of investigations. My successor in office, Mr. Dirk Harrison, made comments during investigations. So they're two separate things. But this is a considered position of the Commission, and I just would want to say that I understand the pros and the cons, and the justifications for either side. In the countries that do allow comment or announcement of investigations, it's justified on a public policy basis, in the sense that you're talking about matters that involve conduct of public officials. I can go straight to the United Kingdom with the Serious Fraud Office, which is their counterpart institution to our Integrity Commission. They make announcements with respect to investigations. If you go on our Twitter page right now, among the first 4 or 5 tweets, you will see one such announcement. But this is a matter for the deliberation by the Honourable Parliament, and we put it as it is. If we have been carrying it forward and we recognize that there is a controversial position, but we leave that again with you, Chair and Honourable members of the committee.
Sure.
Chairman, can I? What I would like,
Sure.
what I'd like to find out, Executive Director, is this section in any way inhibiting your work, firstly, and the alternative, would allowing you to comment ab initio from the beginning enhance your work? So, because I know that this was well considered by the Joint Select Committee, chaired then by the former Minister of Justice, Mark Goldin. They put it forward. I sat in the committee. We agreed to it because we felt that commence just to initiate, just to say investigation has been initiated, was highly prejudicial, and very often the prejudice caused to the person is not removed even when the commissioner report that there's nothing. Because just, you see, and what happened, as you know, or you see in the press, matters have been referred to Integrity Commission. Because of this section, your commission presently have not been able to confirm or deny, and many of them you're investigating. I know that. But the point is that some of them you may not be investigating, but people like to say they have sent the matter to the Integrity Commission just for the prejudicial value.
Understood, Member Chuck. Let me answer your question this way. There you have the documents from the annual report, the 2011, about the investigations that we did.
By the way, just a third follow-up. What is prohibiting you, once you have reported to Parliament, from releasing the information?
Okay, I'm going to answer the question.
You see, in other words, why my recollection why this was put in was to stop those frivolous allegations. But once you have reported to Parliament, in the report you can say that that allegation by Delroy Chuck is now being investigated. Nothing is wrong in you reporting to Parliament to say that the allegation made by X against Y, the public official, is under investigation. You're reporting to Parliament. In other words, having started it, you have started investigation because you see some substance there. But at the moment, you feel almost bound, from what I'm seeing, of not revealing anything. But I think the idea here was that you can reveal in your report to Parliament that investigation, say, in a construction being done at the ministry, has started based on allegation. Okay. Well, no, they go broadly, generally.
Can I just come in? I have a, first I want to say, I heard the question Member Chuck raised, but I also want to expand the issue beyond the Integrity Commission and to deal with the society. And we have a very low trust level in terms of our ability to hold public officials accountable. So I support an amendment, but with a proviso. I believe the Integrity Commission should be in a position to indicate that they have initiated an investigation. And the only other thing that they should say publicly, if they comment on it, is to indicate a time frame for the completion. So I don't believe there should be any details of an investigation said publicly, but I do believe it is important to confirm or deny that you have started, and that if you come back 6 months later, you can say, I believe we will complete it within X period of time. But nothing on the specifics of the investigation to be said in the public domain. When it comes to Parliament and it is tabled, then you can have a fulsome discussion. But it is important, I believe, for public confidence that people know whether you have or not, and that there isn't a view there that matters that may be swirling, the Integrity Commission either has not taken on board, or if you have, then indicate to the public that you have. So I broaden my position beyond your effectiveness to do the work, but to engender public confidence, it is important that people know whether an investigation has started or not.
Member Chuck and Member Robinson,
Chairman.
Thank you very much for your comments.
Chairman, Edie, I think this particular area is going to be the subject of further investigation from the committee. So I would ask you to hold your responses until you've heard. Because I think the AG had something to say in that regard. Just to have you benefit from the fulsome responses of members, so that, in all fairness, you don't keep repeating yourself. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to say that I recognize that this recommendation is a hot button issue. Even while the committee is sitting, I see in the public conversation space comments on this section. And I think that there is a lot of pressure in the society in relation to hearing about matters under investigation which allege acts of corruption. Because I was part of the process when the clause, which is now the section, was determined, I believe this committee, as constituted, may perhaps benefit from some of the discussion in the Parliament recorded in the Hansard around this particular clause and why it was settled in the way it was settled. But just for the record, it says until the tabling in Parliament of a report under Section 36, all matters under investigation by the Director of Investigation or other person involved in such investigation shall be kept confidential until the tabling of the report. And then it goes on to say, and no report or public statement shall be made by the Commission or any other person in relation to the initiation or conduct of an investigation under the Act. So, to the best of my recollection, the compromise that was struck is to enable the reporting to be done to the Parliament. Right? So, Chairman, I would ask that the committee ask the clerk to just get the records of the Hansard to help inform us. It's a real hot button issue, but there was the consideration that as much as there is the need to know, prohibiting a report until such time was necessary because the harm that would be done may never be undone in the event that a report turns out to be unsubstantiated or the investigation unsubstantiated. So it's a balancing act, and I think the real issue was raised by the Minister of Justice as to whether this prohibition on the reporting until the tabling in Parliament and thereafter, nothing being said about the initiation and the conduct of the investigation, prohibits or hinders the discharge of the core functions of the Commission in dealing with investigations and allegations of corruption. So, there is a particular way we have to analyze the request to see what's the harm and what's the benefit. I know that this provision is highly sensitive for those who believe that there is a good place for it, and for those who are saying, well, not so good, we want to know. So ultimately, I would ask that the committee have the benefit by way of reminder from the deliberations, because in the interpretation of statute, we can always have regard to the deliberations in the Parliament during the passage of the law to get a better understanding and appreciation of the provisions.
So I think what we didn't allow in the beginning is for the ED to state really what is the mischief that he is trying to correct in this regard. So we'll allow for
Thank you, Chair. A huge mischief which works against the interest of the country, public confidence in the government, public confidence in its institutions, including the Integrity Commission. I just distributed a document, and I was faced with a similar challenge when I was Contractor General, although the Contractor General Act authorized me to make announcements about investigations. And I did an analysis of the investigations that I did, 21 of the top ones at the time, and you will note that 8 of them, the allegations were made by members of Parliament, usually in respect of conduct by opposition members of Parliament, or vice versa, and calling on the Contractor General in those days to commence an investigation. You will also see a list here where allegations are made in the media, and we see that from time to time, of improper conduct, allegations of corrupt conduct on the part of public officials, and calls being made for the Interior Commission and other institutions to commence an investigation in the matter. We can't say to the public whether or not we have acceded to those requests, whether the request was made by a parliamentarian, as this list will show. I've named the parliamentarians in this case, or whether or not we have acceded to a request coming from the media or an allegation which is made in the media. And I will ask my colleagues to speak, Director of Investigation and the Director of Information and Complaints, because they can share with you the impact that this is having right here in Jamaica. Our Director of Corruption Prevention, Director Ran, has been making some public education presentations, and he attended the Bankers Association conference, at which the Minister of Finance was also one of the speakers, and he can tell you the responses that he has gotten. People are questioning whether or not we're effective or we're doing our work. And the fact is that we are conducting investigations, but we can't say to anybody that we're doing an investigation. This is not good for our country. Right now, we're perceived to be very corrupt. In the English-speaking Caribbean, we're ranked the 3rd most corrupt country by Transparency International, after Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana. That is one big reason. Undermining of the confidence on the part of the public in our national and our public institutions. Government, Parliament, and the anti-corruption institutions and law enforcement institutions of the state. People assume that we're comatose, we don't exist. You know, we're taking a salary and we're doing nothing because they can't hear from us. The section says you can't speak about anything until it gets into Parliament. But the very Parliament that has written that law reserves to themselves the power to make allegations about corrupt conduct and asks the authorities to start investigations.
No,
can I finish?
But no, on a point of order, Chairman. Because the ED is not following the Act. Because the Act says, until it is tabled in Parliament. So you, on a monthly basis, can tell Parliament what matters you have initiated in the past month. Without necessarily giving all the... So your position that the country believes that you're comatose and you have not done an investigation. Yeah. If you table at the beginning of every month that in August we have initiated 20 matters dealing with A, B, C, D, that would clear up the doubts that people have that you're not doing anything. So my response to your position, every month or every quarter, table in Parliament that you have initiated these, so that all the scandalous allegations that are made in the media and so on, they can see, notwithstanding that they've made this, the Commission have not seen it fit to start an investigation. But it is useful to know that those that you have started investigation on is well known to the country.
May I just ask, before you respond, Mr. Christie, is it your understanding of the provision that the Commission is barred from reporting even to the Parliament matters that are under investigation. Is it your understanding of the provision?
Section 36 gives us the authority to make reports to Parliament on any matter that we may consider appropriate. Right. As I said, we have exercised that discretion once.
And only once you have reported that a matter
recently,
is under
with
investigation.
The emergency contract report.
All right.
But I hear what.
I'm just seeking some clarification because
yes.
I don't. And in subsequent reports, you have chosen not to include that any report in respect of matters under investigation, even though matters have been under investigation.
We have never done that, Madam.
You've never reported to the Parliament that a matter is under investigation, albeit that you are empowered to report to the Parliament anything that is considered reportable, for want of a better word.
Reportable, yes.
In other words.
Yes,
all right.
yes. Under Section 36(3), I think it
right.
is.
And if I'm understanding you well, you're saying that enabling the Commission to speak publicly would further the work of the Commission so that, among other things, people do not form the view that the Commission is comatose.
That is one reason. There are
I said
others.
Among others,
yes,
right.
There are others. The other one that I'd like to raise, Chair,
okay.
and members of the Honourable Committee, is that when you announce a report, the public is aware that you have started an investigation. And this inures to the benefit not only of the person against whom the allegations are made, but also to the investigation. We get information. We get information. If they do not know what you're doing, then you do not get that third-party information. So that's another good reason. And with respect to the what yourself, Member Malachi Fort and Member Chuck, the possibility you raise of using the mechanism under Section 36(3) to do a special report, right? And I'll ask the Director of Investigation, Director of Information Complaints to speak. When we start an investigation or when we get a complaint, it may be that you may want to report on it right away, right? And can I just remind the Honourable Committee that on our Commission are two retired justices, a former President of the Jamaica Court of Appeal and a retired Justice of the Supreme Court. I believe that in that Commission, as it is constituted, the authority to determine what's commented on and how it's commented on, and that it's done in a responsible way, is something that can be, and this is my personal view.
May I just interject right there?
That can be left to the Commission. In other words, it could be that you could craft a provision allowing this sort of thing, disclosure to be made, but the Commission would make that decision, as opposed to members of the Executive. In any event, the members of the Executive are subject to the general and specific directions of the Commission. So I've heard the various options. There's the option of just announcing the investigation, right? And then there's the option of commenting on the investigation. I would start with announcing the investigation. And I concede that there are pros and cons. But, I've said enough. I would like to give my fellow directors an opportunity just to say a few words.
Just before you do, I think there's a third option which I think you shouldn't avoid, that of reporting it to the Parliament more frequently.
I responded on that.
Right.
What I'm saying is that a monthly or a quarterly report.
Allow me, because
yes.
I listen very well, I believe, and very patient too. The mischief I sought to have you enunciate to us that you seek to correct is in relation, I think, to the efficiencies and the efficacies of your work. How does this aid, supports in the execution of your duties, and indeed to ensure that your function of being the guardian of the integrity and probity of the nation is preserved. And I think that that is at the heart of everything. And if indeed the Parliament, which has the responsibility to oversight all of that, and it is the center for which all responses are made, because this is the highest court of the land, and this is where the matters that are critical to the people are adjudicated, then I think that a report to Parliament on a frequency that allows you to not be restrained and constrained is appropriate to be considered.
First question asked by Member Chuck has not been answered. He asked a question whether or not announcing investigation, how does it assist in their work? And if they don't announce, how does it prejudice their work? He has not answered that question. He's asking for the privilege to announce. Answer.
No. The point that the committee will have to grapple with as part of the answer is the provision of information on matters under investigation if it is announced is one of the issues from the Commission's perspective. But just before I forget, because the Director pointed to how the Commission is comprised and the deference that is being asked for, understandably so, to say that we would have to trust the Commission in how it deals with the matter. I believe that's understandable. But I should like to draw the committee's attention to the Chairman's remarks in the report to the Parliament, the second annual report of 1920. It was distributed to us. And when I read the Chairman's remarks in that, it jumped out at me. The tone of it jumped out at me. And I confess that the 1920 second annual report, the Chairman's remarks at page 3. No, 1920, all of those came to us. The second report of 1920, because, I'm inviting the committee to just have a look at that against the backdrop of what the ED said about how the Commission is comprised and, the tone and thing that we can expect from comments, 1920. So it begins with, page 3. Okay. So the ultimate paragraph on page 3 said, at this point, it is appropriate to note that from time to time, a few parliamentarians, inside as well as outside of Parliament, have called for the Commission to comment on matters that are under investigation. In so doing, they seem to forget that they have enacted a law which forbids the Commission or any other person from reporting or making a public statement in relation to the initiation or conduct of an investigation until the report is tabled in Parliament. Other things are commented on in those remarks that I just ask for a read by the committee members, like I say, against the backdrop of what was said. I
suspect the last paragraph makes the point why the recommendation is here.
No, Chairman, I don't think the committee or the Parliament will escape grappling with this request. We will have to balance two things primarily, is the perceived harm, which was debated rigorously, that the Parliament in its wisdom felt would be done in an irreparable way if comments, public statements were made at a particular juncture. against what the Commission is saying they see as an imperative for this prohibition to be lifted. So it is an issue that we will have to consider and consider thoroughly. There is a lot of angst around it, evident not only in the tone of the chairman's remark, the recommendation itself, but matters in the public domain.
Chairman, can I just say, so when I look at the recommendation, I personally don't have a problem with the first part, the initiation. Where I would have a problem is, and on aspects of an ongoing investigation as deemed necessary and appropriate. I don't like that discretion. And I'm not personalizing who is on the commission because personalities will change. So we may have conservative persons who will act in a particular way. You may have other people who take the view that they should talk every week. I want that discretion removed. So for me, the compromise for me would be you can comment on initiation, and the only other comment you could make publicly would be around the time frame for completion, but nothing on the content of the investigation. That is where I would.
Well, I hear you, member, and from where I sit as chair, I'm grappling overall with the absolute necessity for a comment beyond the report to Parliament. I'm driven by the view that the appropriate arrangement must be that the Parliament knows that this investigation is happening and the world then after. And I'd like us to look at that and for perhaps the director to consider it. In other words, the issue is who initiates the public information concerning the investigation. Is it by virtue of the report to the Parliament or is it by an announcement by the Commission?
May I just remind, before the floor goes back to the Commission, that when the matter was discussed, we were reminded that the Act does not relate solely to parliamentarians, around whom there seems to be a higher suspicion of corruption than other public servants. So take, for example, and the balancing act that is required to be done is about dealing a further blow to the confidence of the office in respect of the office holder, because this act also impacts the Office of Chief Justice, the office, all of persons who are to report. So sometimes it is important to remind ourselves that this is not about parliamentarians, even though the spotlight may from time to time be shone almost exclusively on the parliamentarians. The Act does not relate only to parliamentarians. And I repeat for emphasis that there is an approach that we will have to take in considering the matter and how we are going to deal with both sides of the coin in order to come to a decision. But here we must, the Commission, in respect of the reasons for the request, and assess we must those reasons. And again, I repeat, let us be reminded of some of the discussions when the Act was being passed, which informed the way that the provision emerged into law.
So I think we've had some fulsome discussion on this, and given that today is not intended to adjudicate in full on any of the recommendations, but rather to take them into considerations for further discussion, I would want to suggest that the ED, having heard the concerns, would just state a bit on it some more, and certainly at our next meeting, I would, as chairman, be willing to say to you that all these matters that we're dealing with we would like to bring us close enough to a head at the very next meeting that we get.
But Chairman, just to indicate that, remember, we have to set up a review committee to look at the legislation.
Yes.
So these 4 matters you're bringing to our attention hopefully will be dealt with by a joint select committee where the pros and cons would be fully. So that is why I think the chairman
which is the
saying,
point that I'm making.
Don't debate it here.
Right.
But we raise the issue. Yes. So a review committee, whether it is the same committee or another joint select committee of Parliament, should be set up soon so that these matters can be dealt with. Okay.
To just further add to the point that I would very much like not to have a meeting of this review committee before that joint select has its opportunity to look at these areas, because I think it is of importance that we deal with them and that we conclude as quickly as possible, because the ED, I'm sure, is not without merit in making these recommendations. So next. 4? No, I think we just need 4 of them. So are you making a proposal that we truncate the discussions on all of these pending the review committee?
Yes, Chairman. I would say, if you don't mind, and I hope you will agree, that the review committee must look overall at the Integrity Commission Act, not only to deal with these sections, but include any additional matter you might want to bring into the Integrity Commission Act that would improve your ability to, right, and or add, as this case may be, when the review committee meets. So we don't need to get. In relation to the other amendments to the other legislation, Mr. Chairman, may I suggest that we let the relevant ministries look at these. In other words, we, in our report to Parliament, can say that all of these other matters like the public procurement, the Evidence Act, and so on, that we ask the relevant ministries to examine the requests or proposals from the Integrity Commission.
No, Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask a couple of questions on it. I mean, we're on the committee. I've gone through it. Most of them I do have an issue with, but 1 or 2 I would want some clarification on for myself in terms of what is being sought in terms of the amendment. So even if you acquiesce to what Member Chuck is saying, I would want the opportunity just to ask 1 or 2 questions. So, for example, under the Interception of Communications Act, and they're asking for the Integrity Commission to be named as a designated person in relation to being in a position to intercept communication for someone who is the subject of an investigation. My question on this is, as it stands now, and maybe both the AG and Member Chuck could help, as it stands now, to get that order, an officer has to go before the courts to seek that order. Is asking to be a designated person, would that bypass that, or would you still, in the same way that a police officer would need to get an order to intercept somebody's phone, would you have to do that?
I am just to let you know, I am allowing members to ask questions now concerning all the recommendations that are before them for clarity, so that it can guide us in our next set of deliberations outside of this committee. So we'll allow that. The reason I'm saying this is that these recommendations are really weighty matters, and they would take us well into tomorrow. And I think you appreciate that, because look at the time now. It's 4:25. We've been here nearly 2 hours, and we are only at item 4 on the recommendations. So I think we appreciate that point, and I would allow for those questions to be asked in relation to the recommendations in general, so as to help to guide us in terms of our future deliberations. Thank you. I think Member Paulwell.
Somebody could answer what I asked in terms of the interception of communication.
Yes. Through you, Chair, the Integrity Commission is not asking for any other arrangement outside of the arrangements that exist under the scheme of the Interception of Communications Act. All that we require is to be named, or as we are recommending, is to be named as an authority that can receive the information, provided that we are conducting an investigation and need that evidence to carry forward the case in a positive way. So that is the request that is being made. Although Section 48(4) gives us the authority to obtain information from other bodies or persons who must hold the information under the Secrecy Act or any other similar legislation, we feel that it would be tidier to have the Integrity Commission named as an authority that can receive the information.
So just for my clarity, right now you could make a request to the police to get the information. You are just I don't know if, but now you are asking directly that you can directly go before a judge, get the information yourself. Is that?
I don't think that's what's been asked, if I may. So under the Interception of Communications Act, you have to make an application to the court for the intercept to be done. The order and the law specify the persons to whom the intercepted information can be disclosed, and disclosure to anyone other than those designated and specified amounts to an offense. And so what they're asking for is that once it goes through that process, the order is granted that they be designated. Just to say that we have to take a fresh look at the Interception of Communications Act, because it's a pre-charter law, and under the new Charter of Rights, we have designated a specific right in respect of protection of communication, twinned with the right of protection of privacy and other property. And, you know, for those who follow it, there is an ex-ante analysis that has to be done once the rights are being engaged. But just to say, Chairman, that, you know, the Parliament and this Oversight Committee has to take great care in how it signals. One, to the extent that we have indicated a commitment to fight corruption, we have to signal in the right way that we are not giving with one hand and clawing back with another hand. Very important, because I think we are all seized of the magnitude of the problem and how acts of corruption impact our democracy and development. On the other hand, the experts who look at this matter says that in addressing it, sufficient regard has to be had to the context in which you are acting. And I know that if I may, without taking tales out of school, a number of parliamentarians have received letters, as they would in the course of things. And in their discussion, I hear a view that it appears the approach that is being taken has left them with some concern, while they are fully subject to and they surrender to the authority of the Commission. It's almost as if there is a got you, catch you, even before matters are concluded. I believe, Chairman, you have received a report from parliamentarians as chairman of the committee, which we would have to discuss with the Commission in very short order about the how of it. And I think it's also linked to some of the proposals for amendment to the statutory declaration form. So the point I want to say is that both sides have to be very careful, and insofar as the committee of the Parliament is concerned, because the Commission is a commission of the Parliament, we have to be very careful in our signalling. And integrity and an integrous approach is not just for the parliamentarians, but for all of us who are in the business of checking and dealing with integrity.
Chairman, can I follow in on what the AG just mentioned? Sometime this year in Parliament, to be exact, March 20, 2021, the request of the commissioners, or the commission, Integrity Commission, was for an amendment to the declaratory form, the declaration of assets and so on. When it came to the attention of parliamentarians, let me see, as mildly as I can, parliamentarians were totally alarmed, because in that new declaration, it is not only asking for information which, with due respect, they find repugnant, but they also feel that at the end, they were being asked to sign a voluntary declaration form that everything is true. They do that already, you know, but at the end of this new form, they have to sign a voluntary declaration form, which is literally saying if you did anything, anything that was incorrect, then you could be subject to criminal penalties. But what is more, Mr. Chairman, it seems that from what I'm hearing, I must admit, well, it doesn't matter if it affects me, but there are public servants who have brought to the attention of parliamentarians, including myself, that they are being asked to sign that what you send in your declaration previously, that everything is true, which is almost asking them to sign a voluntary declaration, that everything which they have presented to the Commission in good faith and have already signed to say that it is true and correct, they are now being sent a form to ask them to affirm that what they had already done is true and correct. I don't know, Executive Director, and I think most of these letters came from Mr. Beresford. Why, Mr. Beresford, I think it came from. Why is this being done when the people have already submitted their declaration?
Parliament has not accepted
Fine.
that.
And then they're asking with a letter and say, sign within a week or 2 weeks at most, that everything that they have sent in is true and correct. And Chairman, may I just say, it is clear that we are not going to be able to go through this form, the new declaration, but at the earliest possibility, we would like to meet with the Commission to justify why they would be asking for this new form. To give one which I find quite repugnant.
Added to that, Minister Chong.
No, just to give you an example. Let me just finish. Just to give you an example. You're asking me to list my children, but in the next section, you put list all your children and give their TRN. Now, I have listed my children, so children are under 18. But the next form is clearly saying, even if they're over 18, list their TRN. And I ask myself, my children personally are 32 to 40. Suppose they refuse to give me their TRN. Am I going to be punished? Am I going to be charged by the committee? Because quite rightly, they could tell me, I am independent of you, Daddy. Don't ask me for my TRN. How do I deal with that? And I'm saying that has been in the new form amongst many other things, which, you're finding. Questions like, what improvement have you done to your house in the past year? You have to go and declare what improvement you have done. You don't even know, and it doesn't say any improvement over 500,000. Any improvement. These are things which the parliamentarians brought to my attention. I saw it. But they find that the new form that you are asking us to, which you have proposed, that needs to be justified. They're not just going to agree to it in this parliament. And that is why at an appropriate time we need to meet so that has to be justified before they sign off, because Parliament has to sign off, because it came as a notice of motion on the 20th of March. And when they saw it, they said, no. Immediately, and since then, we have been looking at it. So
well, I've heard these points. I think Member Charles wants to make an intervention.
Thank you, Chairman.
He's yes, allow him. He has not.
The AG
You are yielding to
had
the
persuaded me
You're
to defer
persuaded.
to her, and I'm so persuaded.
Okay, well,
No, Chairman, I think it's just
a
because
chivalrous man.
the matter is such a hot button matter, but just to share a perspective with the Commission is that those who have received the new format letter, to the extent that it's a new format, are wondering aloud whether there is something that they are not understanding, because having submitted the reports as they are required by law to do, having signed that to the best of their knowledge, information, and belief it is correct, if the Commission has good reason to require further information, then they're wondering why wouldn't it come in a form to say that having received it, whether for inconsistency or whatever, as you go through your investigation and assessment of the report, you are inviting them to either supply you with additional information or to come in, instead of putting it in a form which now makes them suspicious as to the approach being taken. And when it came to my attention, you know, because of the other hat I wear as Attorney General, we have to be so careful that in the way we go about, we don't invite suspicion as to motive in the discharge of our functions. And I think that is a lesson that all of us have to learn, including the committee. We don't want a posturing to say because we are among the category of persons who must submit, then we don't want to be scrutinized, because it would be inconsistent with the power that is given to the Parliament to pass law for peace, order, and good government. You can't have it both ways. You can't be blowing hot and cold at the same time. So whatever the new approach is, it has created a lot of angst, not in the parliamentary group alone, but in the wider public servant, whomever have gotten it, because they feel as if there is an attempt to say, got you. I have reason to, to further query, and I got you. And it is causing some issue. But I do believe the chairman in due course will have a more specific conversation. But since it came up.
Chairman, could I just one?
Just to add, I was following up on Member Chuck's comments and just raising the issue, Chairman, that if it is that note was not received by all persons, all parliamentarians, then I believe AG, that it's not just a matter of suspicion, but there would be good reason for persons who received it to have not just a concern, but to ensure that they do everything necessary to review and assess and advise themselves or get the necessary legal advice, to know that they don't end up putting themselves in a position which would, under other circumstances, be tantamount to, adhering to entrapment. Because you're being asked to, Chairman, to state, to affirm categorically. What exactly does that mean? What exactly does that mean? Is there a distinction between you affirming that your statutory declaration is good to your knowledge and understanding and affirming categorically that it is? And if there is an issue, unless you're presumed to be someone who is seeking to circumvent the law, why not raise the issue and advise and say, listen, we have determined that there are some matters which are of concern to us. Can you address these specific issues? I think that the approach itself
but as you make the point, I think that it is a standard practice, and we do get letters from time to time asking for further and better details and for information. So I quite understand the point, but I'm not so sure what this particular letter that they're talking about is really. And I would await Mr. Beresford's explanation.
In the explanation, Mr. Beresford, I was just asking for a clear understanding, if any, of the distinction between what we have here in the form and the request for a categorical affirmation. So I do solemnly and sincerely declare that the particulars given by me herein are, to the best of my knowledge, true, accurate, and complete. And so, again, you see, we all have roles and responsibilities. And we have to ensure that as we try to probe, that we also respect that person's, we are humans, maybe there's an issue that has arisen, maybe there's something that has been omitted, whatever the case may be. I think that the approach is not just suspicious, but it is something which persons who have received that correspondence, that communication, very well need to ensure that they take the right advice and advise themselves categorically before they put themselves into any position which they can't get out of.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just to, with your permission, to give us an opportunity to respond to the comments that are made so that the proceedings can be productive. A lot of questions are being raised, but we would like the opportunity, however short the period of time you're prepared to grant to us, for us to respond. And I think that will inure to the benefit of everyone. So if we could allow Mr. Beresford to...
Before you do, I take your point. We are closing in on 5 o'clock. I would want us to have another session with you before, in fact, we even go to reporting to Parliament for joint select or anything, because I do think that there are these points that need clarification and further and better understanding of it. So, Mr. Beresford, we're going to allow you, we have 15 more minutes, and then we are going to break, and we will set another meeting quickly. Forgive me that my other avocation dictates that I have to be out in the market to see if we can really make sure the tourism industry comes back fully. And so I'll be away for a short while, but I will program the next meeting to coincide with my return so we can continue the discussions. Yes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for your questions and concerns. And I just want to set it straight. There are 3 issues that you have raised. One with respect to the general third schedule in terms of the proposals that are made, which you said we would treat with separately. And then the other having to do with the voluntary declaration. The voluntary declaration is attached to the existing form that we are putting forward as the new proposal. The reason why we included that voluntary declaration is because we intend to use an electronic declaration system. Now, we had put it in place only because the regulations have not been passed, one, and then secondly, that the whole matter of the electronic key, which would allow someone to just submit strictly online. So all they would require to do is to enter the information in the electronic declaration system and then print that one voluntary declaration form and sign that form. So that, yes.
Proposing exactly what was read by Minister Charles is there. So why would you want this additional voluntary declaration under Section 7, which is, you know, when you do that, you know it has certain implications. You have already said already in the form you're proposing, the very point, sentence that was read by Minister Charles. Why would you want more than that?
Let me clarify again. The only purpose it serves, that voluntary declaration, is if we have implemented the electronic declaration system. It means now that persons wouldn't sign the manual form. They'll enter their declaration, then they print that one sheet, and that is the sheet that they would sign and submit. And that's only in the absence of what we call an electronic key that is to be implemented as a part of the electronic declaration system. So right. That is the only reason why
at the next meeting,
there.
Look at the declaration fully.
Yes.
All right.
Chairman.
So just to say.
So I think, Sorry, I think that one of the things that we perhaps need to agree on before we leave here is that the provisions that are in the recommendations, which are not yet approved and authorized by us, that they not come into effect until after the deliberations are over and we have changed the legislation to give effect to them. So that we would suggest that, you know, the action following on these recommendations be held until we have concluded the arrangements therefrom.
Chairman, I want...
Yes, could I, Chair? Sorry. If I could just complete. So that is the second
No, I'm
matter.
sorry. I thought you were, and I apologize. So please go ahead.
No problem, Chair. That is the second matter, and we can discuss that further. But the third, which I think is of most interest...
Before you go to the third matter,
Sorry.
and it's only because the session is so interactive. You know, Chairman, an explanation makes... I'll turn my mic off. I will await Mr. Beresford's completion.
All right. As it concerns the one that I gather have made persons most anxious, the reason why we have now introduced that new form letter asking persons to revise their statutory declaration is because we're finding that a lot of them are inaccurate. A lot. No, one second, Chairman Chuck. Sorry, Member Chuck. 1 second. So what we are doing is allowing persons the opportunity to look back. We're not trying to entrap anyone. We want all the information, and I can tell you this much.
Chairman.
Of the persons that we have written to, it's only probably four of those persons would have signed without sending additional things after looking back at the form. And we don't intend to take action as a result of that. We're giving persons an opportunity to go back and look to see whether or not...
you must be explicit and say,
yes,
John Brown has not completed this thing to my satisfaction. I've written to you, I'm asking you for A, B, C, D, and if you don't do that, that's a different matter.
But remember, that is not the case. We have not looked to see that you have left off things. That's not the starting point. The starting point is just to ask you to look back. And let me tell you something. Let me give you a good example. We wrote a similar letter to a public official, not a parliamentarian. We got a 4-page letter of the amount of things that were not included. Now, can you imagine if we started to examine and assess that form? That person would more likely be referred for false information.
Chairman,
what we are doing is to try our best, because we know over the years that we have been getting declarations sometimes that all you get is signatures, not even information on the form. So what we are doing is allowing persons the opportunity to look back over and then tell us what was omitted. And then we assess that information and then make a determination. So there's no intention to entrap anyone at all.
Chairman, if I could just... A question that is relevant. A question relevant to that response, Chairman. A question related to it, rather. And I understand what Mr. Beresford is saying to be that there is no purposeful or it is not as a result of them having an evaluation that has had some adverse outcome or finding. And so my question is, and for clarification, was this request then made to all persons, all members of Parliament? This request for affirmation, for categorical affirmation of your statutory declaration, was it made across the board, or was there a selection process for some persons and not others? Because that would then concern me, as you know, if it is that there was no preliminary examination that raised any issue, but then there were only selected persons that were communicated to, then what would be the basis for the selection?
Every single parliamentarian at some point will get that letter. every single public official also at some point will get that letter. The objective is to have full and complete declarations, baselined as at now, because what is happening, as I said before, the system to a great extent was not taken seriously. Not by everyone, because there are some persons, and they know themselves, every year, duly completed, all the information is there. We know that because we examine them. But there are others, when we start to do our third-party checks, which is more robust now, we're finding that there are a lot of information that was not included. What we're saying is that we are not making a judgment. Either way, what we're saying is please look back over and submit all the information. So there's no intent behind it, other than to get the correct information so we can do the correct assessment and certify the declarant.
So I think that's clear to the point that you seek, to get further and better information. And indeed, based on third party. But the point that the team is making is that there is provision for you to bring those to the attention of the declarant and to indicate that you have done this and you have found that. So the issue of saying to them to make a voluntary declaration ahead of their knowing even what you have found, or indeed if you have found something, is perhaps where the issue is in their mind. And I think you should take note of that.
Chairman, adding to that, Chairman, there's no way that they could be able, that they would be in a position to tell us, because they have not evaluated it yet.
Chairman, I have to, before that I have something to read into minutes, make sure that it's noted, but there's a conflict here, in explanation. The chairman of the Integrity Commission, when he started first, made a public statement that they randomly selected officials to send it to. Now he's saying that everybody. That's not what the chairman did, but it was in the paper. He made this statement publicly that they select people randomly. No, he's saying everybody.
No, I don't think he's saying everybody got it yet.
No, he said.
He said over time.
Hold on, man. Let me finish. Don't tell me what I heard. He's saying that no, but that's not what the chairman of the commission said.
But he said over time.
No, that's not what the chairman says. I'm doing what the chairman says against what he said. The chairman would have said over time. The chairman said it's select official randomly. Okay? They pick you out of a hat.
Point taken, member.
But what I'm seeing here with this chairman, before I read this in a minute, I made a statement before and I want it to be reflected in a minute, is that they send something here in Parliament, a new form, declaration form. And before notice of motion was given, our announcement, we found that stuff and it was withdrawn. But what these guys have been doing, they're coming through the back door with the same stuff. All right, what does that mean? I take that back. What does that mean? They're coming through the back door with the issue that was not approved, declaration and what have you. That's what's happening here. But what I want, anyhow, before I end this issue, I want the minister to reflect a request from the committee to report to the House on the matter of statutory declaration by the Integrity Commissioners and the staff of the Integrity Commission. I want the minutes to reflect that to Parliament of a concern that was raised here.
Minute to reflect that you made that reference.
Chairman, that I made it? So are you going to say that each thing from individually, Chairman?
No, I'm saying
that are you going to say that what is raised?
The minutes will reflect the contribution members make. When decisions are made, the minutes will also reflect the decision.
The report to Parliament does not stipulate a particular member.
No, I'm hearing you, member. I'm only trying to make the point.
No, but the minutes
what is reported to Parliament is the decisions of the committee.
Chairman, before we jump from the other matter, before we move from the matter, can I just make one final remark? Chairman, might I beckon to you? I don't want to. I hear Member Paulwell, but before we move from the letter that some persons received, and I have a better understanding now that you say it's random and that persons will be receiving it all the time, as you say. and perhaps it was, well, put it this way, there is a time limitation that is provided to persons to be able to respond. And I can understand that in everything you would need to have some kind of expiration of the period of time. Now, I think that there are a number of persons who will have some issue with that because there are just circumstances that may not allow for a full re-evaluation of all of the various things that you're asking. So if it is that this is a judicious exercise that is seeking to truly evaluate and ventilate matters, I do think that at least at this preliminary stage, before we go into anything else, you need to look again on the time that is afforded persons to adequately respond. Because I would not suggest or recommend to anyone that they sign a document of that nature if they don't think they have adequate time to go through what you're requesting, which is a categorical affirmation. It would be wrong, and if it is that that's not your intention, I think you may be inadvertently placing people in that kind of situation. I put that on the record.
And I would like a last...
I think Member Paulwell, in order.
And I would like
yeah,
a last...
then you, yes.
Chairman, and it is just a follow-up to a point that was raised earlier by Mr. Chuck, where he invited the executive director, if they had other things to put forward, recommendations at this time, that they could do so. But there's one outstanding matter that is there, ED. When we were doing the campaign finance legislation, it was raised that we have not in any way regulated the operations of lobbyists in Jamaica, and that lobbyists are a reality as it is in other jurisdictions. So it might be, I want to suggest that you might want to consider what type of regulations that can be put in place to deal with the role of lobbyists in our society and how we can ensure that their activities are transparent.
We will develop some recommendations for the committee's consideration. Chairman, Mr. Beresford would like to respond to Member Warmington's comments.
Thank you very much, Chair. Member Warmington, you're absolutely correct. The chairman did say that the declarants were randomly selected, and it was based on an article with respect to permanent secretaries at the time. And that is the case. They were randomly selected. Even now, you are randomly selected, but we have to start somewhere and we'll end somewhere. But we intend to cover every declarant. So I just want to clarify that so that, you know, the wrong impression is not sent.
Chairman and Mr. Beresford, I must tell you, I'm a little disturbed by your revelation this evening that a public official actually gave you a 4-page addition, because that public official must have signed, I do solemnly and sincerely declare that the particulars given by me herein are to the best of my knowledge true, accurate. And then that public official find it in his or her conscience to say, I have another 4-page. Because one of the reasons why I wouldn't sign that letter, and I didn't get one, I don't recall getting one, because you would be setting me up. Because if I don't say yes, then if I say no, I forgot to declare that I had another property elsewhere, I would have lied to you.
Assume to lie to him.
Because I've solemnly declared, and that is why nobody who signed that letter, no, you get me? Like that public official. My God, that public official has lied and need to be reassessed. So you see the concern when you get a letter like that, you must state categorically that it is there. I suppose most people would say yes. No problem. But those 4 or 5 you said, 4 or even that person should be in danger. No, my God, I'm really perturbed. And that is why I'm saying we have to be so careful. As members have said, you could have asked, as Ms. Carr said, you never print what you say. I send letter of all things like my bank statement. I get it from the bank. I send it. She asked me I must write it out in the form. No problem. Fine. But if I ever send a bank statement that I have, and later on I send it in, I should be in trouble.
Mr. Chairman, just final comment, please. Final. And mine is not on this. On item 16, regulating the transition of senior public officials into private employment. There are some recommendations here that are concerning to me, particularly where it relates to procurement personnel being barred from working in the private sector with private contractors. I think we need to make the distinction. A procurement officer should be following a process that leads to the procurement of goods or services, a process that would include a tender, etc., etc. Now, there are cases where persons have discretion to choose, but those are, in my understanding of the public sector, very, very low. So we should not be penalizing a procurement officer who follows a process which leads to the procurement of goods from company A, and company A may be the best bidder, and over time company A gets 3 or 4 contracts. That person shouldn't be penalized from working for company A if the person has followed the procurement process. Meaning it's not their sole decision that company A got the contract. So I'm just cautioning, because I saw it here for procurement personnel. I'm also concerned about what are considered senior level employees, right? About being a cool out period. Understand the one with BOJ and individuals who supervise banks, right? But it seemed to be much broader than that. And I think this requires some more careful consideration before we propose this. So that's my final comment, Chair.
AG, the final, because I have to make a few comments and then we break. I would like to also give the director an opportunity to close in this context, recognizing that it's not a closure of the report overall and the recommendations, but rather insofar as today's meeting is concerned. I'd also like to propose a time for our next meeting, but to hopefully start much earlier to give us a little more time to be able to go through the details and to conclude so that we can move forward to the Parliament with a report. So before we go to any other business, I'd like also to indicate that the recommendations that are here before us should not be implemented before they are fully considered and the legislative and other adjustments made to give you the authority to act, i.e. the affirmative resolution by Parliament. So I would urge that none of these recommendations that you have made here be implemented at this time until we have completed our deliberation. And I'm, as chairman, moving with expedition to enable a completion of the deliberations to facilitate it.
Chairman, may I just respond to that concern? These are recommendations, and they're recommendations for amendment to the Integrity Commission Act. So we're very much aware that until the Parliament, and only if the Parliament amends the law, that we would be entitled to act on this. We would not leave here with any understanding that we're going to act on this.
Because the voluntary declaration form which has been sent was exactly.
Yeah.
I raised that one because it came up and has been the subject of much discussion this afternoon. And it is in section 39(1)(2), note 8. And it is in the body of those insertion that is recommended. So I would urge that we give consideration to that. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much, Chairman Bartlett. I want to assure you that we have not implemented the voluntary declaration. We have introduced a step in the process asking persons to review their statutory declarations before we start to examine. So we have not implemented
That's what
anything.
the form says that come to them, you know. That's what the form says. So I think
that's not what
well, forgive us, because
you
what came to me as chairman to look
yes.
at. So I think that there's something to talk about there. There's something to talk about.
If I may just clarify, so it goes on the record. The statutory declaration that is to be submitted is the statutory declaration that is prescribed in the third schedule. What is prescribed in the third schedule may be amended by a process. The power to recommend the amendments, the power is given to the Integrity Commission, but it is subject to affirmative resolution. So I think what I understand the request and the reminder to the Commission is, unless and until the form of the statutory declaration, which is set out in the third schedule, is changed and affirmatively resolved by the House, then what is required of declarants be in conformity with the third schedule form as it stands now.
No, we haven't reached there. The member wants to make a point on any other business which I would like to bring to a conclusion very quickly.
Chairman, an important housekeeping matter.
Yes.
Just to remind that the minutes of July 21, 2020,
yes,
that was provided to the committee as background information, contains reference to the error that is in Standing Order 73D.
Yes.
E. D,
which needs to be
subcategory E.
corrected.
And the Parliament was directed to correct the reference error. But the last sitting of the House was on the 28th of July, which is just a week later. And when the House was recalled on the 11th of August, it was to deal with security matters. And then the Parliament was dissolved for the general elections of September. My request is that the committee sends an isolated report to the House for the issuance of an erratum in respect of Standing Order 73DE to change the reference from Section 34 to Section 36 of the Integrity Commission Act. It's page 47 of the House Standing Order. So an erratum is to be issued because it is dealt with under the slip rule when we did our checks.
Any other business? No. I want to thank the members. I think we had a very robust discussion today. And I want to thank the Executive Director and his very efficient team. We had good responses, yes. And we want to continue this discussion. I'm proposing that the next meeting be on the 18th of November, Thursday the 18th. I'll be back and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to start earlier than 2 o'clock. And hopefully we start a little earlier than 2 to give ourselves some good time, Edie, Christie, to really look at the areas. And I'm sure members would have had an opportunity to even look more closely at the recommendations that you've made, and we'll be able to hopefully put ourselves in a position to make a recommendation to the Parliament. Thank you. Meeting stands adjourned.
Chairman, you should have moved for a motion of adjournment to be seconded in keeping with the meeting rules.
Jamaica and its workforce are advancing quickly. Life-changing opportunities are arising. You need training and support. We are the Renewed Heart NSTA Trust, committed to providing new and emerging